Shalom. So I was watching a series of documentaries on the Goths. I think it's called Storm Over Europe. And it was pretty amazing. I'm not going to lie. It was very interesting information. But really, what surprised me most is that these Goths who started in Poland as far as Europe came from Scandinavia, and they were called the Skanzu or Skanza. And this is in the year like 280, 300 AD. It's basically a first Viking invasion, but they're not calling it Viking, they're calling them Goths. So these Goths hit Poland and start heading south, and the agreed upon reasoning behind them leaving where they came from is just the hardship of the life in Scandinavia. It's, snowy and the ground is not as fertile and there's not as much of it. And so they leave and they get into Europe. And they are basically doing the same thing that they've done before and did 1,000 years later. They kind of plow through the area that they're going through. They steal things and they try to get along with the local people, but if the local people don't get along with them, then they fight them and they take some land. Sometimes they settle down and they get farther south, and then they kind of split off into the Ostrogoths, which is in the eastern branch, and then the Visigoths, which is the western branch. And just as they're getting down towards Italy and Rome, because Rome is the big power at this time in Europe, the Huns come sweeping in from the steppes to the east. And the Huns are a military power that Europe is just not ready for. And it's very interesting in history how technological or military developments change the whole course of history, because it allows one people to overcome another people, because the defenders are just not ready. It's a different paradigm when they show up, and that's what the Huns did. The Huns were mainly cavalry, and they used a double compound bow, which was very powerful and also very accurate, and they could use it from horseback, whereas in Europe at that time, most battles were infantry, on foot, using like short swords. The Romans used short swords, and compact, a bunch of guys standing together and having a shield in front of them to protect them, and have guys right behind them, maybe with a longer spear to poke people. And that was the European way of warfare. And so here comes these cavalry riders by their hundreds of thousands who are shooting these bows, which can penetrate, a leather armor, and they just devastate everybody. So the Ostrogoths fight them and then keep heading south, and the Visigoths flee from them and they head west. So the Visigoths end up going into France, and then the Frankish people, the Franks, I think, are another Viking group, kind of take over France and drive the Visigoths even further west. So they go into Spain, and they hang out in Spain for 2 years, mainly in Toledo. And when they're fleeing like that, they don't try to fight with the local people. They hang out in there and try to get along with them. And archaeological studies have shown that about 200 years after they were there, the Visigoths had completely become Spaniards, and their jewelry that they wore and pottery and all that suddenly becomes where they are. So they settle there. Well, then after the Huns are defeated, and I think the Huns were defeated either by some Ostrogoths or Visigoths, the Moors come in, and they drive the Visigoths back out. And the Visigoths at the time, I think the leader's name was Theodoric. And his group is used to moving, right? They've gone from Poland all the way down over to Spain. He gets a wild idea, and they go south across Gibraltar into northern Africa, which is still Roman-held territory, but it's Rome has been weakened by these fights, and so there's not a whole lot of strength there, and they start assimilating into that culture, and they love it. Apparently, northern Africa was very fertile. Of course, it's hotter, but they're okay with that. It's very productive, and so again, instead of trashing the place, which sometimes they would do, they assimilate and they kind of take over two cities that are there, Tunisia and Carthage. Now, remember Carthage? Carthage is a city that was established by Phoenicians, who the Romans had driven out of Italy. And one of the reasons the Romans didn't like the Phoenicians is because they would sacrifice their children for prosperity. And so there's a difference of cultures there, and the Romans throw them out. And it's a woman, and legend has it, the woman who starts the whole concept of Carthage is the niece of Jezebel, because biblical Jezebel is a Phoenician princess, a Canaanite princess. Canaanite, Phoenician, Carthaginian, they're all the same people. She comes up with the idea that Phoenicians need to own land, because up until that point they're just port city people, and you do trade with them and they do the boats and everything. Well, Carthage is the first time they plant and have a real establishment, and then Rome took it over. So when the Visigoths show up around 400 AD, they kind of take over Rome. The Roman city that's there. They don't change it, and they love it. And they stay there for a couple of centuries until somebody else comes along and pushes them. They also, while they're there, take the islands around. Sardinia and Balearic Islands that are right off the coast of Italy. And, well, that's it for this part of the history lesson, but the Visigoths and Ostrogoths play a huge part in later sacking Rome. So it's really just the first Viking invasion, and they do what Vikings do. They wander around, they steal stuff, they loot stuff, they burn stuff, and sometimes they assimilate. And I think it's interesting how, even in the documentary, they kept calling them the Germanic people, when in truth, they all started up in Scandinavia. The first Viking invasion of Europe. And another thing that kind of cements that is a historian talking about these people wandering around says when they come into Africa, it's blonde, blue-eyed people. That's Scandinavia. All right, y'all. Do your own research. It's fascinating stuff. Thanks for watching. Bless you. Shalom.